Now, I need to preface this morning's talk with reminding you of an older version of that gospel reading. Today's reading, we hear about bags of gold, but I suspect a lot of you will know the version that talks about talents. So as I'm talking, think about talents, because all will become clearer a little later on. But to think about being given 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent. And I do wonder how many times you've heard today's reading from the Gospel of Matthew. The eagle-eyed of you may know that the window just above Peter's head there is a rendering of the story of the 3 servants. And the focus is often using the talents we have wisely and not wasting them. Now, I don't want to argue about that interpretation because it is something I agree with. It is something I'd encourage you to do, that we use our talents wisely. But there's something else that's going on here. And there's a hint of that at the end of the passage that sets it in the wider context of Matthew's gospel. In the final verse this morning, we heard, "And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Jesus doesn't mince his words here. The message is clear, that there will be judgment for those who have not used their talents wisely. This passage is part of Jesus' teaching about the end times that starts with the 7 woes in chapter 23, includes the signs of the end of the age in chapter 24, and here in chapter 25, we have the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of whom didn't think ahead and bring enough oil for their lamps, and ends with the separation of people as the shepherd separates his sheep and his goats. This story is a clear warning about being ready. But as I reflected on this passage a few weeks ago, I noticed something else going on here. When I've heard sermons on it, the focus has been on the positive behaviour of the first and second servant, for their industrious use of the talents given them to multiply them into more talents. Indeed, on occasion, the passage has been used to encourage those involved in fundraising for the church, perhaps with the handing out of crisp £5 notes to the congregation with the encouragement that they use the money in some way to, well, hopefully generate more money. But this wasn't what I noticed a few weeks ago when I heard the passage read out. I started to wonder about the third servant, the one who dug a hole and hid his master's money. Now, as an aside, we often think that he did nothing. But he did dig a hole, and it must have been quite a big hole, as, well, 1 talent is estimated to be worth somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 denarii. That was at the time, and when 1 denarius was the average daily wage of a worker. And this got me thinking. According to the Office of National Statistics, the current average for weekly earnings in the UK is £663. So assuming a 5-day week, as most people in the UK generally work a 5-day week, this makes today's average wage of £132.60. 10,000 times this is £1,326,000 in today's money. And of course, we wouldn't be talking about paper money back in Jesus' day, so assuming this amount in the fewest number of possible coins in common circulation, well, today the largest coin in common circulation is the £2 coin, so that would take 660,000 £2 coins. Now, sad as I am, I want to know how heavy that is. I wonder if you can guess how heavy 660,000 £2 coins are. I must say, when I worked it out, I was somewhat staggered to realise it's nearly 8 metric tons. And assuming they are packed really, really tightly, so they're wedged right up against each other, the hole you'd need to dig to hide those 660,000 £2 coins would need to be at least 1 metre wide at least 1 metre long, and at least 1.33 metres deep. That's quite a big hole. If the third servant was around today, we couldn't accuse him of doing nothing. We couldn't accuse him of being lazy. He'd put quite a bit of effort into digging his hole and lugging his 8 tons of coins into it, albeit to very little effect. But though I had some fun with the scale of these numbers, they are rather moving away from the point I want to make. And the point is, why did the third servant bury the talent he was given, rather than putting it to work? Well, unlike many of the stories Jesus tells us, where we have to guess what the motive of the characters was, here we're told why the third servant behaved as he did. He tells us in verses 24 and 25, when he says, "I knew you were a hard man, so I was afraid." The third servant was afraid of the master, a master he saw as hard, and so he didn't want to risk losing the one single talent he had been given, and so he buried it. And this got me wondering what had happened in the past between the third servant and the master to cause this fear. What had happened so the servant saw his master as a hard man? What had damaged their relationship so badly? Again, we are perhaps given a clue as we read on and see how the master reacts to the third servant. He calls him wicked and lazy. He takes the single talent from him and gives it to the first servant. And then he calls the servant worthless and throws him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know about you, but I find this rather uncomfortable reading. I wonder how this fits with stories such as the lost sheep, where the shepherd goes out to find that one sheep that has strayed and is lost. Or the prodigal son, where, despite appalling behaviour, the father rushes out to greet his returning son and showers him with gifts and, most importantly, unconditional forgiveness. If the father in the prodigal son and the master in today's story are metaphors for Jesus, why is the outcome so apparently different? The son is forgiven, but the servant is thrown out. One explanation is that whilst the father and the master might both stand for Jesus, the prodigal son and the third servant represent different things. The prodigal son stands for an individual who's wandered away from God, has lost their way. For them, God is forgiving and actively looking for their return. However, many commentators see the servants in today's story as representing Jesus' church. Unlike the prodigal son, who didn't seem to know better, the church knows what gifts or talents it has been given. We can read about them by reading the Bible: gifts of welcome, hospitality, non-judgment. Indeed, a few verses after today's gospel, we have Jesus saying, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And he goes on to say, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Whilst earlier in Matthew, Jesus warns us, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Before giving us the almost comical image of someone noticing a tiny, tiny speck of dust in the eye of someone else, but failing to notice this great beam of wood that's sticking out of their own eye. We know that we should show welcome and hospitality. We know that we should not judge. It is if we fail to do these that we are behaving like the third servant and risk being cast out. But my musings on the third servant didn't end there. I was and am still bothered by why he was fearful of this master, a master he sees as hard. What had happened in the past to cause the breakdown of this relationship? Now, granted, this is a parable and an exaggerated story Jesus uses to make a point, but I know of occasions where I've seen relationships damaged because of harsh words instead of words of encouragement, because of hostility instead of welcome, because of judgment instead of open forgiveness. And I began to wonder whether there has been occasions when the church, as a body, has caused damage to relationships because of harsh words instead of words of encouragement, because of hostility instead of welcome, because of judgment instead of open forgiveness. Here at St. Mary's, we want our church to be at the heart of the community. Indeed, this is the strapline that we use as part of our logo. We set out to be a welcoming, hospitable and non-judgmental place where all can come to find out about and deepen a relationship with God. And we do a lot towards making this happen. But I do wonder if there is even more that we can do, both as a church and as individuals. However easy it might be to give a harsh response because we're tired or busy, let's try instead to ensure we focus on being encouraging. Even if we are cautious of those who appear different, instead of being hostile, let us focus on being welcoming. And at times when we find ourselves being tempted to judge, let's ensure we instead focus on being non-judgmental. I do wonder whether there are people in our community who see the church as a hard master, the hard master in today's story. In fact, I don't wonder. I know there are people who do. I've had conversations with some of them. Conversations such as, I couldn't come to church, I'm not good enough. Or, church is just about not being allowed to do stuff. Or, I don't want to come to church because everyone will judge me. I'm sure that no one here would want to think that we're a harsh, hostile or judgmental place. And I know that's not the kind of church that we are or indeed that we want to be. But there are people in our community and further afield who have this view of the church, the corporate church if you like, for whatever reason. Just like the third servant and his damaged relationship with the master, something has caused a rift between these people and the corporate church. This might not be because of anything we are doing here or anything any of us has done, but I wonder whether we could change that view of the church. I wonder, what more could we do so that people in this community could see us as being the encouraging, welcoming and non-judgmental place we want to be? I wonder, what could we do so that people don't see us as the hard master, but instead as the prodigal son's welcoming father who is already out on the road, ready to greet his return with encouragement, welcome, and non-judgment. Amen.
It's notice time. Are you sat comfortably? Don't worry, there's not too many, okay? I've got to find them first. I will. So, the first one is that as you came in, you probably noticed that the doors are not there. But we have started on the work for the power-assisted doors, and it is going smoothly at the moment, and hopefully will be completed by the end of the week. Secondly, some of you may have heard that Mary Pace died recently. I had the privilege of seeing her daughters yesterday, two of them, and spending some time with them. They would like me to share with you that Mary requested that she has a service of thanksgiving and celebration for her life. And this will be held on the 22nd of September at 2 p.m. here in St Mary's Church. The family will be having a few days earlier a very, very private funeral service for Mary, but that is a date for your diary for those who would like to come along. And also tomorrow, some of us are meeting here about 9:30 for a sorting and cleaning and coffee and Danish pastries to get ready for Sparklers the following week. Now this is where, if you were listening carefully to Matthew's sermon, so if you would like to come along tomorrow, that would be wonderful. But if you would like to use your gifts of chatting, clearing up, tidying, setting up, please could you see me afterwards or send me an email. It would be lovely to have a couple more helpers on our rota. I put the rota together yesterday and we are still a bit stretched. And that is it. No more notices from me this morning.